It was late evening, and I had just returned home from a tiring day at work. As usual, I tried to initiate some casual conversation, but the atmosphere felt strangely heavy, different from the usual evening routine. She had barely spoken since I arrived, and I sensed something serious was on her mind. We stood in the kitchen, the soft hum of the refrigerator filling the awkward silence. I waited for her to speak first, hesitant to push the matter. Eventually, she turned towards me, her face reflecting a mixture of resolve and discomfort. Without any gentle introduction or preliminary warning, she bluntly stated, "I can't bear to look at you anymore." Those words came out abruptly, slicing through the silence like a sharp blade. It wasn't an argument. It wasn't shouted in anger or frustration. It was delivered in a calm, yet devastatingly firm voice. The starkness and sincerity of her statement caught me completely off guard. I felt momentarily paralyzed, unsure how to respond or even process such a severe admission. Stunned, I searched her face for signs of hesitation or regret, hoping perhaps I had misheard or misunderstood. But her expression remained steady and unwavering. It was clear this wasn't impulsive or something said in the heat of the moment. She had clearly contemplated this deeply, and the decision behind her statement was definitive and deliberate. My immediate reaction was to question her. "What do you mean by that?" I asked, attempting to conceal my shock, keeping my voice as neutral and calm as possible. She briefly looked away, momentarily breaking our eye contact, seemingly gathering her thoughts. When she finally looked back at me, her resolve appeared even stronger, more decisive. "Exactly what I said," she responded quietly yet firmly, her tone leaving no room for negotiation or misunderstanding. "I don't know how it happened, or even precisely when, but something has changed fundamentally. Every day, looking at you feels unbearable." I stood there, still trying to comprehend her words, realizing quickly there was nothing left for me to clarify. She had spoken plainly and honestly, leaving no ambiguity in her intentions. This wasn't about an argument, disagreement, or some temporary irritation. It was deeper, rooted in something she had clearly internalized for a long time. There was silence again. Neither of us knew how to navigate forward. I briefly considered asking more questions, probing further into the why behind her harsh revelation. But seeing her stance, the cold certainty in her eyes, I recognized it was pointless. Any attempt to seek explanations or further discussion at this stage would only prolong the inevitable, causing more pain and confusion. Instead, I chose to accept it silently. It felt useless to prolong a conversation that clearly had reached its conclusion. I nodded slowly, accepting her words without further questioning or argument. The truth was clear enough, painful yet unequivocal. We stood there briefly in quiet acknowledgement of the end we both now saw clearly, even if we hadn't explicitly said those words. Eventually, without further words, she quietly moved past me, heading towards the bedroom, leaving me alone in the kitchen, still processing the harsh reality she had just handed me. Left alone, I began contemplating what steps to take next. The truth was now evident. Our relationship had reached its definitive breaking point. In that single evening, our entire world shifted irreversibly. From this moment onward, there was no going back, only forward into uncertainty and inevitable change. In the immediate aftermath of her confession, I stood quietly, considering my next move carefully. It became obvious to me that staying around, pretending everything was normal, would be unbearable for both of us. The silence in the house felt heavy, amplifying every second that passed. I knew I needed to act decisively. That night, I barely slept, spending hours contemplating a plan to leave without creating unnecessary drama or confrontation. My mind was clear. I had to vanish discreetly. No notes, no arguments, and certainly no goodbyes. The thought of leaving everything behind, although challenging, felt like the right step. The following morning, I began my preparations discreetly, ensuring that my intentions remained hidden. I continued with the usual morning routine, having breakfast quietly and making casual small talk to avoid suspicion. I felt a strange sense of calm knowing I had already made up my mind, despite the uncertainty that awaited. Once she left for work, I sprang into action. I moved systematically, packing essentials swiftly, clothes, necessary documents, some cash, and items of sentimental value I couldn't imagine leaving behind. I avoided taking anything that could easily lead someone to trace my whereabouts. The priority was to disappear completely, to become untraceable. Throughout the process, I maintained strict composure, methodically double-checking everything to ensure there were no mistakes or clues left behind. Every drawer, closet, and corner of the house was carefully considered, making sure that the house appeared as normal as possible to prevent immediate suspicion. The sense of urgency pushed me to act fast but calmly. My mind was constantly aware of the ticking clock, knowing that any unexpected return home could jeopardize the entire plan. Each passing moment intensified my focus and efficiency. Within just a few hours, my preparations were complete, leaving minimal visible evidence of my departure. Once ready, I loaded everything into my car carefully. I felt an odd mixture of relief and tension, realizing that every action now brought me closer to a new, unknown chapter in my life. Checking the house one last time, I felt no need for nostalgia or hesitation. The decision had been made, and there was no turning back. I drove away calmly, deliberately choosing a route that avoided common places or people who might recognize me. My goal was clear: to vanish entirely, at least for a while. I deliberately left my phone behind, ensuring that any attempts at contact would fail. Communication would only complicate the separation and confuse the clarity of my decision. As I drove further from familiar streets and buildings, my tension slowly eased. I knew it would only be a matter of time before she realized I was gone. But by then, I planned to be far enough away, starting over somewhere new, where my past would not follow me. Eventually, I reached a quiet town several hours away, a place small enough to remain anonymous but developed enough to blend in unnoticed. I quickly arranged temporary accommodation at a modest hotel, paying in cash and avoiding any unnecessary interactions. My goal was simple: stay invisible, blend in, and begin adjusting to this new reality. That night, alone in an unfamiliar room, I felt a profound sense of relief. The hardest part, the initial departure, had been successfully executed. Now, all I had to do was adapt and remain disciplined in maintaining my anonymity. There would be no second chances or do-overs. The life I knew was officially behind me, and ahead lay only the uncertain path of starting over, hidden in plain sight. After settling into the hotel, I knew that maintaining a low profile was critical to my plan. The initial feeling of relief gradually gave way to the reality of being alone in an unfamiliar place. Yet, I didn't allow myself much time to dwell on it. Instead, I quickly established a simple daily routine designed to keep me unnoticed by others. I started each day early, leaving my hotel room quietly, blending in effortlessly with locals as they hurried to their jobs or daily errands. I began exploring the town, familiarizing myself with its streets, cafes, parks, and local markets. I paid attention to details, learning the quickest routes, busiest hours, and areas to avoid. My main objective remained clear: to disappear into this new environment without arousing suspicion. Back home, my sudden disappearance must have already caused alarm. I knew my absence would initially be confusing, possibly even frightening for my wife. However, I couldn't allow myself to become distracted by thoughts of her reactions. Instead, I remained strictly focused on maintaining my new anonymity. As days passed into weeks, I grew more comfortable with my surroundings. I found a modest apartment in a quiet neighborhood on the outskirts of town, paid for in cash to avoid any records. The landlord barely asked any questions, sensing my desire for privacy and respecting it without issue. It was the perfect arrangement, providing the isolation I desired without raising suspicion. To further conceal my identity, I took on temporary odd jobs that paid cash. These small, manual tasks not only helped maintain my financial independence, but also offered the advantage of minimal interaction with others. I deliberately avoided forming personal connections, always keeping conversations brief and superficial. I monitored local news occasionally through newspapers, cautious not to rely on digital platforms that could trace my activities. Surprisingly, there was no mention of my disappearance or search attempts. Perhaps my wife had decided to handle it privately, avoiding unnecessary attention from family or friends. Or maybe she simply wasn't ready to publicly acknowledge my absence yet. Curiosity eventually got the better of me, prompting me one afternoon to discreetly visit an internet cafe to check local online news from my hometown. I navigated through the pages anxiously, scanning carefully to see if any report had surfaced about my disappearance. To my surprise, I found nothing. No reports, no missing person alerts, no social media posts from her or our close circle. The absence of any public response puzzled me deeply. Why had she not reached out for help or contacted authorities? Was she coping with my absence better than I anticipated, or had she simply chosen to ignore it altogether? As the days turned into weeks, my curiosity grew stronger. Though committed to my disappearance, part of me wondered why there had been such silence. Was she relieved by my absence, or had she simply chosen not to involve others, hoping I would eventually return? I couldn't tell, and not knowing increasingly bothered me. Finally, after weeks of successfully maintaining a low profile, I realized I needed clearer answers. Without revealing myself, I decided to make one discreet phone call home from a public phone booth. My intention wasn't to speak, only to listen, to briefly reconnect with the world I'd left behind, hoping to gain some clarity about the impact of my absence. Standing nervously in the phone booth, I dialed our home number, holding my breath as I listened to the ringing tone. My heart beat rapidly as the sound continued, each ring intensifying my anticipation. Finally, after several tense moments, the ringing stopped, and I heard her voice, a simple recorded message asking to leave a message after the beep. The tone in her voice seemed ordinary, indifferent even, offering no hint about how she truly felt about my disappearance. I quickly hung up without leaving a message. Walking back slowly to my apartment, I realized I had reached another turning point. My curiosity had brought me dangerously close to breaking my careful isolation. Now, more determined than ever, I reaffirmed my resolve to remain vanished until I fully understood what my disappearance truly meant to her, and to myself. Weeks after my risky call home, I found myself struggling to maintain the anonymity I'd so meticulously built. But the lingering questions haunted me, and I decided I needed answers, not direct confrontation, but clarity. Carefully, I reached out to an old mutual friend, Mark, someone trustworthy who could discreetly provide insights into the situation back home without betraying my whereabouts. I contacted Mark, an old friend from college who was reliable, discreet, and unlikely to reveal my location. We met at a cafe in a town neither of us had ties to, minimizing any chance of recognition. As he sat down opposite me, Mark's expression was guarded yet sympathetic, suggesting he had news he wasn't eager to share. After exchanging brief pleasantries, I wasted no time getting to the point. I asked directly about how things had unfolded since my disappearance. Mark hesitated briefly, carefully choosing his words. He began by telling me the obvious, that my wife had been initially surprised and worried by my sudden absence. But it was what he revealed next that caught me completely off guard. Mark explained that shortly after I vanished, my wife's behavior began to change significantly. She became withdrawn, initially avoiding contact with our mutual friends and even family. Then, unexpectedly, she started reaching out to people she had distanced herself from long ago. He hesitated briefly, clearly uncomfortable, then added that among those she reconnected with was a man named Adam, a former colleague of hers I remembered vaguely from years ago. This information felt strange, yet familiar. I recalled brief mentions of her friendship with him, something I'd considered insignificant in the past. Mark explained that their interactions had become frequent and public enough to draw attention. Friends, including Mark, initially believed she was just seeking comfort or advice during a challenging period. However, it quickly became clear to everyone around her that their renewed relationship was more than just supportive friendship. Mark explained that several people had questioned her directly about my absence, curious about why she hadn't reported it. To everyone's surprise, she always responded calmly, telling them I was simply taking some personal time away and that there was nothing unusual about my departure. Her casual explanation raised suspicion, as those closest to us knew me well enough to understand I wouldn't vanish without good reason or explanation. As I listened, I felt a profound sense of disbelief. The secrets I had never suspected surfaced painfully, revealing layers of deceit and misunderstanding that existed long before my sudden departure. Mark, sensing my shock, paused briefly to allow me to process what he had shared. Continuing, Mark explained how he had initially doubted her explanations, suspicious that something deeper was occurring. He mentioned that, eventually, She stopped hiding her new relationship entirely, openly admitting to friends that our marriage had long been over emotionally for her. My disappearance had simply provided her the clarity, and perhaps the opportunity, she needed to move on openly. Listening to Mark, I finally understood the depth of the truth that had eluded me. Her blunt confession in the kitchen that night had not merely been an expression of dissatisfaction. It was an admission born of guilt and a desire for freedom from the relationship she had already emotionally abandoned. Mark's revelation left me with profound clarity. Although initially painful, this new understanding allowed me to view our relationship and my disappearance from a different perspective. The reality I had refused to confront was now evident. My disappearance hadn't shattered our marriage. Rather, it had merely exposed the cracks and secrets already present beneath the surface. Thanking Mark for his honesty and discretion, I left the cafe that afternoon with a newfound determination. The confusion and uncertainty I'd carried for weeks finally gave way to an understanding of the real reasons behind our failed relationship. Armed with this painful but necessary truth, I knew precisely what my next steps needed to be. Months had passed since that difficult conversation with Mark, and my life gradually settled into a new, steady rhythm. I had grown comfortable with my solitude, establishing a daily routine that kept me occupied and unseen in this unfamiliar city. My days were predictable, split between quiet work and carefully managed solitude. I avoided familiar places or interactions that could reconnect me to my past. One afternoon, however, my carefully constructed anonymity was disrupted unexpectedly. I was walking through a crowded marketplace, browsing casually at stalls filled with fresh produce and local crafts. My mind wandered, lost in thoughts about nothing in particular, when suddenly, among the bustling crowd, I spotted her unmistakable figure. My body froze instinctively, adrenaline rushing through me. It felt surreal to see her there, entirely out of context, in this random place far from home. She was standing at a vendor's stall, examining items quietly. My first instinct was to leave immediately, to avoid confrontation or discovery. Yet, something made me stay, hidden among the other shoppers, observing her carefully. As I watched discreetly, I noticed subtle yet undeniable changes in her demeanor. She looked calmer, different from the woman who had once confronted me so directly in our kitchen. Her appearance suggested a certain peace or acceptance I hadn't expected to witness. My curiosity grew, drawing me closer despite the risks involved. Moving quietly through the crowd, I observed her interactions with vendors and other shoppers. She smiled genuinely, laughed easily at small jokes shared by vendors, and seemed at ease navigating the market alone. Watching her this way, detached from the tension of our shared past, felt oddly comforting yet deeply unsettling. Then, almost inevitably, our eyes met. Her gaze locked onto mine for a brief yet intense moment. Recognition flashed instantly, her eyes widening slightly before quickly regaining composure. I considered turning away immediately, disappearing into the crowd before either of us felt compelled to act. Yet something held me in place, curious about what would happen next. She approached me slowly, confidently yet cautiously, carefully navigating through the busy market stalls. When she finally stood in front of me, neither of us spoke immediately. The noise and movement around us faded into the background, leaving only the strange, quiet intensity of our unexpected reunion. "You seem well," she finally said quietly, breaking the silence that had stretched between us. "I am," I replied simply, keeping my tone neutral, unsure of where the conversation would lead. She hesitated for a moment, clearly uncertain about how to continue. Then she spoke again, this time with surprising honesty. "I didn't expect to ever see you again. Honestly, I wasn't sure if I ever wanted to. But seeing you here, I realized there are things left unsaid." Her openness caught me off guard. "What things?" I asked cautiously, intrigued but wary. She sighed softly, glancing away briefly before looking directly at me again. "When you left, everything changed dramatically. At first, I felt relieved, I won't deny that. But the longer you were gone, the more I understood my mistakes. The distance allowed me to see clearly how badly I'd handled everything." Listening carefully, I felt an unexpected wave of relief and confusion. I hadn't anticipated this admission, especially after everything Mark had shared. Yet her words felt genuine, sincere. For the first time since our separation, I saw genuine remorse reflected clearly in her face. "I'm not saying this to ask you to come back," she quickly added, sensing my caution. "I just needed you to know. I needed the chance to apologize in person, without expectation." Her sincerity surprised me, diffusing some of the tension I'd initially felt. For a moment, we stood quietly, absorbing this unexpected encounter amidst the noisy marketplace. Finally, I nodded slightly, acknowledging her honesty and apology. "Thank you," I said gently. "I appreciate your honesty." She smiled softly, relief visibly evident on her face. "Take care of yourself," she whispered, turning away slowly to disappear into the crowd, leaving me standing alone once more, quietly processing this entirely unexpected moment. After that unexpected encounter, I spent days processing everything she had shared. My routine continued as usual, but thoughts constantly filled my mind. Her apology and openness brought clarity, but they also forced me to reconsider the path ahead. I realized it was finally time to make a definitive decision about the future. No more running, no more hiding. Determined, I began making practical plans to finalize my separation from the past officially. I contacted a lawyer discreetly, ensuring that all legal proceedings could begin without requiring me to return physically to our hometown. This legal step felt necessary, removing the ambiguity surrounding our relationship and bringing official closure to a chapter that had ended emotionally long ago. As the legal process progressed quietly, I found myself gradually reconnecting with parts of life I'd long neglected. I allowed myself to build new relationships cautiously, forming careful friendships within my new community. Slowly, my world began to expand beyond the isolated existence I'd chosen previously, opening possibilities for a genuinely fresh start. Weeks turned into months, and the paperwork finally arrived confirming that our separation was official. Seeing the formal conclusion on paper was surprisingly freeing. It represented not just legal closure but emotional release, allowing me to fully embrace the new life I'd cautiously begun building. Soon after, I decided to make one final, necessary visit back to my hometown, discreetly, quietly, to settle any remaining loose ends personally. My goal wasn't confrontation, nor was it reconciliation. It was about truly closing doors that had remained slightly open for too long, allowing myself to move forward completely without lingering doubts or regrets. Upon returning to town briefly, I noticed how much everything had changed, or perhaps how I had changed. Familiar streets felt foreign, and places once comfortable now seemed distant. Avoiding unnecessary encounters, I methodically addressed practical matters swiftly and efficiently. On my last evening in town, sitting alone in a small cafe I used to frequent, a figure approached quietly, causing me to look up. It was her, standing calmly beside my table. I felt neither fear nor anxiety, just a quiet acknowledgement of our shared past and present reality. She asked if she could join me briefly, to which I agreed with a simple nod. Sitting across from me, her expression remained peaceful, calm, yet profoundly sincere. She spoke first, softly yet clearly. "I heard you were in town briefly, and I wanted to see you again before you left, this time intentionally, not by accident. I want you to know I'm genuinely glad you're doing well." I nodded, understanding fully her sincerity. "Thank you. It's been an important journey." She smiled slightly, clearly relieved by my peaceful demeanor. "For me too. It took losing you completely to understand myself better. I regret how everything unfolded, but not the clarity it ultimately brought us." Her words resonated deeply. They confirmed what I'd already realized myself, that our separation, though difficult, had ultimately been necessary for our individual growth and understanding. We talked briefly, comfortably, not about regrets or recriminations, but rather about lessons learned and futures ahead. There was a mutual understanding, a shared acknowledgement that our paths had diverged permanently, yet respectfully. As our brief conversation ended, she stood quietly. "Goodbye, and truly, take care of yourself," she said warmly, turning to leave. "Goodbye." I responded sincerely, feeling genuinely at peace as I watched her walk away. This time, I knew it was truly final. The following morning, as I left town, there was no lingering doubt or uncertainty. I drove away confidently, understanding clearly the definitive conclusion of our shared story. With genuine closure finally achieved, I embraced the future openly, ready to fully commit to the new life waiting for me.
Our story has come to an end. If you've made it this far, how about subscribing to our channel? It helps us immensely. I've selected 2 other videos for you that I'm sure you'll enjoy. Feel free to click on them. I'll be waiting for you in the next story. See you soon.